I'm Sadie, 32, and birthdays have always been my thing. Picture my cozy Oregon apartment balloons everywhere, the smell of fresh cake in the air. My husband Nathan is cracking jokes. My sister Clara is snapping photos, and I'm soaking it all in. Then my grandfather Harold walks in his first visit in years. He's frail, but his eyes sparkle as he hands me a faded photo of a red convertible. "Did you like the car I sent last year?" he asks. I freeze. "What car?" I say. My parents' faces go white. What's your wildest family secret? Drop your city in the comments and hit subscribe to find out what happened next. The room felt smaller after Harold's question, like the walls were inching in. I stood by the kitchen counter clutching the photo of that cherry red Mustang, its curves gleaming in some old Polaroid light. My parents, Diane and Raymond, hovered near the couch, their eyes darting like cornered animals. Nathan's hand brushed my arm, a silent stay calm, but my pulse was already racing. Clara, oblivious, was scrolling through her phone, humming off key. I wanted answers, but the air was thick, heavy with something unsaid. "Grandpa?" I said, my voice tighter than I meant. "What do you mean, a car?" "You sent it last year," Harold nodded, his weathered hands folding over his cane. "A 1967 Mustang Sadie. I had it shipped to your folks' place. Didn't want you dealing with the paperwork." His smile faltered, searching my face. "You never got it." I turned to my parents. Diane was twisting her new diamond earrings, the ones I'd noticed earlier, sparkling against her neck. Raymond stared at the floor, his jaw tight. "Mom, Dad," I asked, stepping closer, "did you get a car for me?" My words hung there, sharp and waiting. Diane laughed, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, sweetie, it's probably a mix-up. You know how these things go." She waved a hand like she could swat the question away. Raymond muttered something about checking with the shipping company, but he didn't move. Their voices overlapped, a clumsy dance of excuses, and I felt a knot twist in my stomach. They weren't just nervous. They were hiding something. Clara looked up from her phone, frowning. "Wait, didn't you guys build that new garage last spring?" she said, her voice cutting through the haze. "I remember you saying it was for storage or whatever." My breath caught. I hadn't thought about that garage tucked behind their house, all sleek concrete and frosted glass doors. They'd bragged about it at Easter, saying it was a smart investment. But storage for what? Clara Diane snapped, her tone sharp enough to make my sister flinch. "That's not relevant." But it was. I could see it in the way Raymond's shoulders stiffened, the way Diane's fingers froze on her earrings. My mind raced back to last year, to their sudden shift from pinching pennies to buying a new dining set, to Diane's stories about a bonus at work. I'd believe them. Why wouldn't I? Sadie, Nathan whispered, his hand now firm on my elbow. "Maybe we should talk about this later." But I couldn't wait. The photo in my hand felt heavier, like it was proof of something I didn't want to name. Harold's eyes were on me, soft but piercing, like he already knew the truth. I wanted to scream, to demand they explain, but my throat felt tight, my words stuck. "Mom," I said, quieter now, "just tell me. Did you get the car?" Diane's face softened, but not in a comforting way. It was the look she used when she'd forgotten to invite me to family dinners, when she'd brushed off my questions about their finances. "We'll sort it out," she said, her voice syrupy. "Let's not ruin your birthday." Ruin my birthday. It was already unraveling. I glanced at Harold, his frail frame slouched in the armchair, and felt a pang of guilt. He'd come all this way thinking he'd given me something special. And my parents, the people I'd trusted my whole life, were standing there lying to my face. The knot in my stomach tightened, and I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and I was only starting to see it. I stepped back the kitchen counter, digging into my spine. The photo of the Mustang was still in my hand, its edges creasing under my grip. Diane's words echoed in my head, "Let's not ruin your birthday," but the room was already splintering. Clara's eyes flicked between me and our parents, her phone forgotten on the table. Nathan stayed close, his presence steady, but not enough to ground me. Harold's silence was the loudest thing, his gaze heavy with disappointment. I forced myself to speak, my voice low but sharp. Sort it out, Mom. You're not answering me. Did you get the car or not? Diane's lips parted, but no sound came. She looked at Raymond, who was rubbing his neck, his tail, when he was cornered. Sadie, he started, it's complicated. There was a mix-up with the delivery and we thought... He trailed off, his words flimsy like tissue paper in the wind. A mix-up, I cut in my chest, tightening. Grandpa says he sent it to you. You're telling me you lost a whole car? My voice cracked and I hated it. Hated how small I sounded. Harold shifted in his chair, his cane tapping the floor. I called your father last year, he said, his tone firm despite his frail frame. He told me it arrived. Said you were thrilled. My stomach dropped. I looked at Raymond, waiting for him to deny it, to say Harold was mistaken. But he just stood there, his hands stuffed in his pockets, staring at the rug like it held the answers. Diane jumped in, her voice too bright, too fast. Dad, your memory's not what it used to be. We never said that. We'd have told Sadie if something like that showed up. She turned to me, her smile forced. Right, honey. You know we wouldn't keep something from you. But I didn't know. Not anymore. My mind flashed to last summer when they'd shown up at my place with a new coffee maker, a fancy one I'd never seen them use. They'd laughed off my questions about how they afforded it, saying they'd found a deal. I'd believed them, brushed it off because they were my parents. They'd raised me, tucked me in, cheered at my graduation. But now, standing in my own apartment, I felt like I was looking at strangers. Clara spoke up, her voice hesitant but clear. I remember you guys talking about a car last year. Not to me, but I heard you in the kitchen one night. You said it was a hassle to deal with. Her words hit like a stone through glass. Diane's face flushed and she snapped, Clara, stay out of this. You don't know what you're talking about. But Clara didn't back down. I'm not lying, she said, looking at me. I thought it was weird, but I didn't know it was yours. My knees felt weak. I leaned against the counter, the cool granite grounding me just enough to keep going. So you knew about it, I said, my eyes locked on Diane. You both knew, and you didn't tell me. Why? My voice was steady now, but inside I was shaking. I wanted them to explain, to make it make sense, but the longer they stood there, the clearer it became. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Raymond finally spoke, his voice gruff. Sadie, we didn't mean for it to go like this. We had some financial stuff to handle. The car was just bad timing. Financial stuff. The words stung sharp and hollow. I thought of the new garage, the Hawaii photos they'd posted online, the way Diane's wardrobe had gone from thrift store finds to boutique labels. Financial stuff didn't add up to that. Nathan touched my shoulder, his voice low. Sadie, let's take a breath. We can figure this out. But I didn't want to figure it out. I wanted the truth raw and unfiltered, and they weren't giving it to me. Harold's cane tapped again, slower this time, like a heartbeat. I trusted you, he said, looking at my parents. I trusted you to give her something I worked hard for. His words cut deeper than mine ever could, and for a moment Diane's mask slipped. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. I felt the weight of it, all the betrayal sinking into my bones. My parents. The people who'd taught me to tell the truth, to work hard, were standing in front of me, unraveling every lesson they'd ever given. I wanted to yell, to cry, to shake them until they admitted it. But more than that, I wanted to know why. Why they'd taken something meant for me. Why they'd lied. And as I stood there, the photo creasing in my hand, I knew I couldn't let this go. Not until I had answers. The drive to my parents' house felt endless. The Oregon rain smearing my windshield. Clara sat beside me, twisting her scarf, her silence louder than the wipers. Nathan had stayed behind, saying I needed space, but I wished he was here anchoring me. My hands gripped the wheel, the memory of Harold's words burning in my chest. I trusted you. My parents' lies were a splinter I couldn't pull out, and I needed to face them alone before I lost my nerve. Their house loomed at the end of the cul-de-sac, its new shutters gleaming under the streetlights. I parked my boots, splashing in a puddle as I stepped out. Clara hesitated, then followed, her breath visible in the chilly air. Inside the living room was too perfect, like a showroom: leather armchairs, a glass coffee table, a rug I knew cost more than my rent. Diane was in the kitchen, stirring tea, her back to us. Raymond sat on the couch, flipping through a magazine he wasn't reading. "Sadie," Diane said, turning with a smile that didn't fit. "You didn't call. Is everything okay?" Her voice was sugar, but her eyes were wary, like she'd been waiting for this. I set the Mustang photo on the counter, its edges worn from my grip. "No, Mom. It's not okay. I want the truth about the car. Now." Raymond closed the magazine, his movements slow, deliberate. "We told you it was a mix-up," he said, his tone flat, like he was reciting lines. "But I wasn't buying it anymore." "A mix-up doesn't explain why you told Grandpa I loved it," I said, stepping closer. "Or why you built a garage right after it supposedly arrived. Or why you're sitting here with new everything while I'm still paying off my student loans." Diane's spoon clinked against her mug, too loud in the quiet. "Sadie, you're blowing this out of proportion," she said, her voice sharp now. "We had debts, things you wouldn't understand. We did what we had to. Debts." The word felt like a slap. I thought of the years I'd sent them money, skipped vacations, bought their groceries, when they said they were struggling. What debts I pressed? The ones that paid for your Hawaii trip? Or Mom's new wardrobe? Clara shifted behind me, her voice soft but firm. "I saw the car, Mom, in the garage last April. It was there for a week, then gone." Diane's face tightened, her lips a thin line. "Clara, you were mistaken," she said, but her voice shook, betraying her. Raymond stood, his hands raised like he could stop this. "Enough," he said. "We sold it, okay? We needed the money. It wasn't personal." "Not personal." My throat burned, my vision blurring. "You sold my car," I said, each word heavy like stones dropping. "Grandpa gave it to me and you took it. How is that not personal?" I wanted to scream, to shatter their perfect little room, but my voice stayed low, trembling with rage. Diane moved toward me, her hands outstretched. "Sadie, we were in a bad spot. You've always been fine. You didn't need it." "Fine." The word cut deeper than I expected. I'd always been the one who was fine, who didn't complain, who picked up the pieces when they fell apart. I thought of the nights I'd stayed up balancing their bills with mine, believing we were a team. "You lied to me," I said, my eyes locked on hers. "You lied to Grandpa. Do you even care what that did to him?" Raymond's face reddened, his voice rising. "Don't bring him into this. We did what we had to for this family. Family." The word felt hollow, like a shell with nothing inside. Clara stepped forward, her scarf slipping to the floor. "Then why didn't you tell her?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you let her think you were broke while you were remodeling the kitchen?" The air grew thick, the weight of her words pressing against us all. Diane's eyes darted to Raymond, then back to me, her composure cracking. I felt the ground shift beneath me, the truth clawing its way out, raw and ugly. They hadn't just taken the car. They'd taken my trust, my history with them, and I wasn't sure I could ever get it back. I stood frozen, Clara's question hanging in the air like smoke. The living room's polished surfaces seemed to mock me, every shine a reminder of what they'd taken. Diane's hands dropped to her sides, her face a mask of defiance and guilt. Raymond paced to the window, his back to us, like he could escape the truth by staring at the rain-soaked lawn. My heart pounded, each beat a question I didn't want to ask but couldn't stop. "You didn't just sell it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You used it to build this. All of this." I gestured at the room, the sleek furniture, the framed art on the walls, the life they'd built while I was scraping by. Clara's eyes were wet, her hands clenched, and I knew she was feeling it too, the sting of being left out of their secret. Diane's voice cracked, sharp and defensive. "You don't know what it's like, Sadie. We were drowning. The house, the bills, everything was falling apart. That car was a lifeline. A lifeline." The word twisted in my gut. I thought of the summers I'd spent mowing their lawn, the Christmases I'd skipped gifts to send them cash, believing they needed it more. "You could have asked me," I said, my voice shaking. "You could have told me the truth instead of stealing from me." Raymond turned his face hard. "Stealing, that's what you think of us. We're your parents, Sadie. We raised you, gave you everything. His words hit like a fist, and for a moment I was 10 again, sitting at their table, believing they could do no wrong. But that girl was gone, replaced by someone who saw the cracks in their story, the lies they'd woven to keep me in the dark. Clara stepped closer, her voice trembling but fierce. You didn't give her everything. You took Grandpa's gift and acted like it was yours to spend. How could you do that to her? Diane's eyes flashed and she rounded on Clara. Don't you dare lecture me. You have no idea what we went through to keep this family together. Her words were venom, and Clara flinched, her courage faltering. I wanted to reach for her to tell her she wasn't alone, but my own anger was swallowing me whole. Keep the family together, I said, my voice rising. You lied to me. You lied to Grandpa. You let me think you were struggling while you were living like this. I pointed to the kitchen, its marble counters gleaming, a stark contrast to my own chipped formica. You didn't need that money. You wanted it. Diane's face crumpled, but not with remorse. It was something uglier, a mix of shame and defiance. You've always been so quick to judge, she said, her voice low, cutting. You think you're better than us, don't you? With your perfect little life, your husband, your independence. You never needed us like we needed you. Her words were a knife slicing through years of love, of trust, of late-night calls when I thought we were close. I felt my breath hitch my chest tight with a pain I couldn't name. Needed me. They'd needed my money, my silence, my willingness to believe their stories. But me, the real me, the one who'd cried when they missed my college graduation, who'd called every Sunday just to hear their voices, they hadn't needed her. You're wrong, I said, my voice breaking. I needed you. I needed you to be honest, to be my parents. And you weren't. Raymond moved toward me, his hands outstretched, but I stepped back, the distance between us wider than the room. Sadie, we didn't mean to hurt you, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. But it was too late. The truth was out, jagged and raw, and it was tearing us apart. Clara's hand brushed mine, a small gesture, but it wasn't enough to pull me back from the edge. I looked at my parents, their faces a blur of guilt and excuses, and felt something break inside me, something I wasn't sure I could ever fix. The morning sun barely broke through the pines as I pulled up to Harold's cabin, an hour from town. The gravel crunched under my tires, and Nathan's hand rested on my knee, his quiet strength the only thing keeping me from turning back. Clara had stayed home, saying she couldn't face more fighting, and I didn't blame her. My chest was a tangle of guilt and fury, the weight of last night's confrontation still pressing down. I needed to see Harold, to apologize for the mess my parents had made, to understand what he'd given up for me. His cabin was small, weathered, with a sagging porch and a chimney puffing faint smoke. I knocked my knuckles, hesitant, and Harold opened the door, his face lighting up despite the lines etched deeper than I remembered. Sadie, he said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of coffee and old flannel. I was hoping you'd come. His voice was warm, but his hands trembled, betraying his frailty. We sat at his kitchen table, a scratched oak slab covered with faded placemats. Nathan hovered by the window, giving us space but staying close. I set the Mustang photo between us, its corners curling now. Grandpa? I started, my throat tight. I'm so sorry. I didn't know about the car. I swear I didn't. My voice cracked, and I hated how raw it sounded, how much I needed him to believe me. Harold's eyes softened, but there was a fire in them too. I know, kid, he said, his hand covering mine. This isn't on you. I should have checked, should have made sure they gave it to you. He leaned back, his breath uneven, and pulled a small wooden box from the table's edge. Inside was a stack of papers, receipts, and a black and white photo of a younger him grinning beside a watch counter. I sold my collection, he said, his voice steady but heavy. Every watch I'd saved for 40 years. That Mustang was for you, Sadie. After your divorce, I wanted you to have something to start fresh, to feel free. My stomach twisted, a sickening lurch. His watches, the ones he'd polished every Sunday, the ones he'd shown me as a kid, pointing out each gear like it was a story. Gone for me. And my parents had turned it into nothing. Grandpa, I whispered, why didn't you tell me? He shrugged, a tired gesture. I wanted it to be a surprise. Trusted your folks to handle it. My mistake. Before I could answer, a car door slammed outside. Nathan glanced out, his jaw tightening. "It's them," he said, and my heart sank. Diane and Raymond stepped onto the porch, uninvited, their faces a mix of defiance and unease. Diane's coat was buttoned wrong, like she'd dressed in a hurry, and Raymond's eyes darted, avoiding mine. They walked in without knocking, filling the small room with tension. "Sadie, we need to talk," Diane said, her voice clipped like she was scolding a child. "You're making this bigger than it is. Showing up at our house, accusing us in front of Clara. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing." The word ignited something in me, a spark that burned through my guilt. "You're embarrassed," I said, standing, my hands shaking. "You sold Grandpa's gift, lied to us both, and I'm the one making this big." Harold's chair scraped as he stood, slower but fierce. "You got no right to talk to her like that," he said, his voice cutting through the air. "You took my gift, my money, and you stand here acting like she's the problem." Diane's face flushed, but she didn't back down. "We had no choice, Dad. You don't know what we were dealing with. We didn't want to burden Sadie." "Burden me," I snapped, my voice louder now, echoing off the cabin walls. "You burdened me every time you asked for money, every time you let me think you were struggling. You didn't just take the car, you took his sacrifice." I pointed to Harold, my eyes stinging. Nathan stepped closer, his hand brushing my back, but I barely felt it. The room was shrinking, the truth too big to contain. Raymond cleared his throat, his voice low. "Sadie, it was $40,000. We invested it, thought we'd double it, make things right. It didn't work out. 40,000. The number hit like a punch, stealing my breath. Harold's watches, his years of care reduced to a failed bet. I looked at him, his face pale, his hands gripping the table, and felt my heart crack open, raw and exposed. $40,000. The number echoed in my skull, a hammer striking glass. Harold's trembling hands, the photo of him with his watches, the Mustang that never reached me, all collapsed into that cold, hard sum. Diane's mouth opened, then closed, her eyes darting to Raymond like he could fix this. But Raymond just stood there, his shoulders slumped, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, now a stranger in my grandfather's kitchen. "You invested it," I said, my voice hollow. "Barely mine. You gambled his life's work and lost it." My legs felt unsteady, but I couldn't sit, couldn't let them see me break. Nathan's hand tightened on my shoulder, his breath uneven, like he was holding back his own anger. Harold's face was stone, his eyes fixed on my parents, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Not just hurt, but betrayal, deep and final. Diane's voice cut in, shrill and desperate. "We were going to pay it back, Sadie. We thought we'd make it right for all of us. You don't know how hard it's been keeping up appearances, making sure you and Clara never worried." Appearances. The words seared through me, hotter than my rage. I thought of their new car in the driveway, the framed vacation photos on their mantle, the way they'd smiled at my birthday party, like nothing was wrong. "Keeping up appearances," I said, my voice rising, shaking the air. "You let me think Grandpa forgot me. You let me thank him for cards and calls, knowing you'd taken everything he gave me." My hands balled into fists, nails biting my palms. I wanted to scream, to tear apart their excuses, but the truth was worse than any shout. They'd chosen their pride over me, over Harold, over the family they claimed to protect. Harold spoke, his voice low, each word a weight. "I wrote you a letter, Sadie. Meant to go with the car. Told you how proud I was, how you'd come through that divorce stronger than I ever could have been." He reached into the wooden box, pulling out a folded paper, its edges yellowed. "They never gave it to you. Never even mentioned it." My breath caught a sob I couldn't let out. A letter. Another piece of him. They'd stolen another moment I'd never get back. Diane stepped forward, her hands wringing. "We didn't mean to keep it, Dad. It got lost in the shuffle with everything else." Her voice cracked, but I didn't care. I didn't want her tears, her half-truths. "Lost," I said, my eyes burning. "Like the car. Like the money. You didn't lose anything, Mom. You took it. You chose to take it." My words were blades, and I saw them land, saw her flinch, but it didn't feel good. It felt like losing something I'd never get back. Raymond's voice broke through rough and loud. "Enough, Sadie. You think you're perfect. You think we wanted this. We were trying to save our home, our marriage, everything we built for you kids." His words were a flood rushing over me, drowning out reason. Save their marriage. I thought of the nights I'd called asking if they were okay, the way they'd brushed me off with smiles and small talk. They hadn't been saving anything. They'd been hiding, building a life on my grandfather's sacrifice. Nathan's voice was soft, almost lost in the chaos. "Sadie, breathe." But I couldn't. The room was too small, the air too thick, the weight of their betrayal crushing me. Harold's letter lay on the table, its words unread, but screaming a testament to everything they'd destroyed. Diane's eyes were wet. Raymond's face red, and I stood between them, my heart a raw, open wound. I wanted to run, to scream, to make them feel the hole they'd carved in me, but all I could do was stand there broken with nowhere left to go. A week after the cabin, I sat on my apartment's couch, the morning light slicing through the blinds. Nathan was at work, and the quiet felt like a bruise, tender and heavy. Harold's letter lay on the coffee table, its words now memorized. "You're tougher than you know, Sadie." Don't let anyone dim that. I'd read it a dozen times, each line a tether pulling me from the wreckage of my parents' betrayal. But the pain wasn't gone. It was a shadow trailing me, and I was tired of running from it. I picked up my phone, scrolling through names until I landed on Audrey, a lawyer I'd met at a community fundraiser last year. Her card was still pinned to my fridge, its edges soft from time. I dialed before I could overthink it, my heart thudding as the line rang. "Audrey," I said when she answered, my voice steadier than I felt it. "Sadie, I need your help. My parents, they took something that wasn't theirs. I want to make it right." Her voice was warm, sharp, like she'd been waiting for a fight. Tell me everything, she said, and I did. I told her about the Mustang, Harold's watches, the $40,000 my parents had gambled away. I told her about the lies, the new furniture, the way Diane's eyes had hardened when I called her out. Audrey listened, her pen scratching in the background, and when I finished, she said, "We can build a case, Sadie. It won't be easy, but you've got a claim. Are you sure you want to do this?" Was I sure? The question hung in my chest, heavy as stone. I thought of Harold's trembling hands, the letter he'd written, the trust he'd placed in my parents. I thought of myself years ago, wiring them money for emergencies, believing we were a team. Going after them meant breaking something permanent, a thread I might never reweave. But staying silent meant letting them erase what they'd done, letting them rewrite my story. I'm sure I said, my voice firm like a door clicking shut. Audrey suggested meeting tomorrow, but I needed to move now to channel this fire before it burned out. I grabbed a notebook, its pages blank, except for a grocery list, and started writing a letter to my parents. Not to send, not yet, but to anchor myself, to say what I couldn't in the cabin's heat. "Dear Mom and Dad." I wrote, my pen digging into the paper. "You took more than a car. You took my trust, Grandpa's sacrifice, the family I thought we were." The words spilled out raw and jagged, each one a step toward clarity. I wrote about the nights I'd stayed up worrying about their bills, the way I'd smiled through their excuses because I loved them. I wrote about Harold's letter, how it reminded me I was worth more than their choices. My hand cramped, but I kept going, the act of writing pulling me upright like a plant reaching for light. When I stopped, the page was full, my heart a little lighter, but the fire was still there, burning brighter now. Clara called as I set the pen down, her voice shaky but resolute. "Sadie, I've been thinking," she said. "I want to help. I saw the car, I heard them talking. If you need me to tell someone, I will." Her words caught me off guard, a spark of hope in the dark. Clara, my little sister who'd always stayed on the sidelines, was stepping up, risking the same family rift I was. "Are you sure?" I asked, echoing Audrey's question to me. "Yeah," she said, her voice firmer. "I'm done letting them hide." I leaned back, the couch creaking under me, and felt something shift. Not peace, not yet, but a strength I hadn't known I had. I was done being the daughter who stayed quiet, who made excuses for their lies. Harold's letter, Audrey's voice, Clara's courage. They were my foundation now, and I was building something new, something mine. The fight was just starting, and I was ready to face it, no matter what it cost. The next morning, I walked into Audrey's office, a small brick building downtown with ivy climbing the walls. The air smelled of ink and old books, and I clutched my notebook. Its pages now, a map of my resolve. Audrey sat behind a cluttered desk, her glasses perched low, her smile sharp but kind. "Sadie," she said, gesturing to a chair, "let's get to work." Nathan sat beside me, his hand brushing mine, a quiet promise he'd stay through this. I handed Audrey the Mustang's paperwork copies of Harold's receipts and a timeline I'd pieced together last night, each date a wound: the car's delivery, the garage's construction, my parents' sudden spending. My handwriting was messy, scrawled in the dark, but it was mine proof I wasn't letting this fade. "This is good," Audrey said, scanning the pages. "We'll demand repayment, maybe file for breach of trust. But Sadie, this could get messy. They're your parents. You ready for that? Messy?" The words settled in my chest, heavy but not crushing. I thought of the cabin, Diane's accusations, Raymond's excuses, the way they'd turned Harold's sacrifice into their gain. Messy was already here. I was just naming it. "I'm ready," I said, my voice clear like a bell in the fog. Nathan squeezed my hand, his eyes steady, and I felt a flicker of pride, small but real. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table, the notebook open, and added to my letter. "You taught me to stand up for what's right. I wrote, my pen steady now, but you forgot to do it yourselves. I'm not asking for your love. I'm asking for accountability." Each word was a brick building a wall between the daughter I'd been and the woman I was becoming. I didn't know if I'd send it, but writing it was enough acclaim to my own truth. Clara came over that afternoon, her hair pulled back, her eyes nervous but bright. She set a shoebox on the table, its lid taped shut. "I found this in their attic," she said, her voice low like she was sharing a secret. Inside were bank statements, a car title in Harold's name, and a note in Diane's handwriting: Mustang sale, 40K stock fund. My breath caught the paper, trembling in my hands. It wasn't just proof. It was a confession, careless and cold. "I'm sorry I didn't look sooner," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I should have said something when I saw the car." I reached for her hand, her fingers cold against mine. "You're saying it now," I said. "That's what matters." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw her not as my little sister, but as an ally, someone choosing truth over comfort. "I'll talk to Audrey," she added. "Whatever you need, I'm in." The weight of her words settled over me, a warmth cutting through the ache. I stood needing to move and walked to the window, the street below, quiet, ordinary. My reflection stared back, tired but unbroken. I thought of Harold, his letter, his belief in me. I thought of the years I'd spent pleasing my parents, swallowing their half-truths, thinking love meant silence. No more. I was done carrying their choices. I turned back to Clara, the shoebox between us, its contents a bridge to justice. "Let's do this," I said, my voice soft but sure. She nodded, a small smile breaking through her nerves. The room felt different, lighter, like I'd shed something heavy. I didn't have all the answers, didn't know how this would end, but I was moving forward, my steps my own. I closed the notebook, its pages full, and stood still, letting the quiet hold me, a woman reclaiming her ground. 2 months later, I sat in a courtroom, its wooden benches cold against my legs. The air smelled of polish and stale coffee, and the hum of fluorescent lights buzzed in my ears. Nathan sat to my left, his fingers laced with mine, while Clara fidgeted on my right, her knee bouncing. Audrey stood at the front, her briefcase, open papers neatly stacked. Across the room, Diane and Raymond sat stiffly, their faces drawn, avoiding my gaze. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes, called the session to order, and my stomach knotted tight and unyielding. Audrey presented our case with precision, her voice steady as she laid out the evidence. The Mustang's title, Harold's receipts, the bank statements Clara had found. She described the $40,000 my parents' stock venture, the trail of their spending. Each fact was a stone building a wall between who they were and who I'd believed them to be. I watched Diane's hands twist in her lap, Raymond's jaw clench. and felt a strange detachment, like I was seeing them through glass. The judge asked for their response. Raymond's lawyer, a man with slicked hair and a cheap suit, stood claiming financial hardship, saying my parents had acted in good faith, believing the car was a family asset. Good faith. The words tasted bitter like ash in my mouth. I thought of Harold's cabin, his trembling voice, the letter they'd buried. Good faith didn't cover that. Audrey countered, her tone calm but cutting. She presented a text from Diane to Raymond, found in the shoebox, sent the day they sold the car. We'll tell Sadie it never arrived. She won't ask. The courtroom went still, the words hanging like frost. Clara's breath hitched beside me, and Nathan's grip tightened, his silence loud with anger. I stared at the floor, my boots scuffed against the polished wood, and felt the weight of their plan, deliberate and cold. Diane's voice broke the quiet, thin and unsteady. Sadie, we didn't mean it like that, she said, turning to me, her eyes pleading. The judge raised a hand, silencing her, but Diane's words lingered, a weak thread trying to stitch up the tear. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. My chest was heavy, not with rage now, but with a dull ache, the kind that comes when something you love is gone for good. The judge recessed for deliberation, and we filed into the hallway, its walls lined with faded notices. Clara leaned against me, her voice barely a whisper. Did you see Mom's face? She looked scared. I nodded, but I didn't trust myself to speak. Scared wasn't enough. Scared didn't undo the text, the sale, the years of half-truths. Nathan pulled me close, his arm solid, but even his warmth couldn't reach the cold knot inside me. Audrey joined us, her expression guarded but hopeful. We've got a strong case, she said, adjusting her glasses. The evidence is clear. They'll likely settle, but it's up to the judge now. Settle. The word felt small, inadequate, like trying to mend a shattered vase with tape. I wanted more than money. I wanted them to see what they'd done, to feel the hole they'd left in me and Harold. As we waited, my phone buzzed, a call from the hospice where Harold was staying. The nurse's voice was gentle, saying he'd had a rough night, asking if I could visit soon. My throat tightened, picturing him in that sterile room, his strength fading. He'd told me to fight, to hold them accountable. But now, sitting in this hallway, the victory felt hollow. My parents' faces, pale and distant across the room, were a mirror of my own loss, and I wasn't sure what I was fighting for anymore. The courtroom doors swung open and we filed back in, the air heavier now, like it carried the weight of every word unspoken. I sat between Nathan and Clara, my hands folded tightly, nails pressing into my palms. Diane and Raymond were across the aisle, their heads bowed, the space between us, a chasm no one dared cross. The judge's voice was measured, cutting through the hum of the room. After review, she said the defendants agreed to repay $20,000 to be paid in installments over 3 years. $20,000. Half of what they'd taken, a number that felt like a compromise but landed like a wound. Audrey leaned toward me, her whisper steady. It's a win, Sadie. More than we expected. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like bartering pieces of my family for a sum that couldn't buy back what was lost. I knotted my throat too tight to speak, and kept my eyes on the judge, avoiding my parents' side of the room. As the gavel fell, Diane stood her chair, scraping loud in the silence. Sadie, she said, her voice sharp, trembling, you've torn this family apart. I hope you're happy. The words hit like a gust of cold wind, stealing my breath. Heads turned, the room's attention pinning me in place. Clara's hand froze on my arm, and Nathan's jaw tightened, but I didn't move, didn't look at her. Happy. The word was a mockery, a twisted reflection of the daughter I'd been, the one who'd believed her love was enough. Raymond pulled Diane's arm, murmuring something, and they left, their footsteps echoing in the emptying room. The judge moved on to the next case, but I stayed seated, my body heavy like it was sinking into the bench. Clara's voice was soft, almost lost. She didn't mean that, she said, but her tone lacked conviction. I shook my head, unable to answer. Diane's words weren't new. They were the truth she'd always held back, now laid bare. Outside, the sky was gray, the air damp with the promise of rain. Nathan drove us home, his silence a comfort, while Clara stared out the window, her reflection pale. My phone buzzed again, another call from the hospice. But I let it go to voicemail, too raw to hear Harold's weakening voice. When we reached my apartment, I found a package at the door, small and unassuming, with my mother's handwriting on the label. Inside was a scrapbook, its pages filled with my childhood school plays. Track meets a photo of me at 16, grinning in Harold's old truck. My breath caught a sharp pain blooming in my chest. The scrapbook was meticulous. Each entry dated a record of love I hadn't questioned until now. Why send it? Was it guilt? A plea? Or just another way to shift the blame? I closed it, my fingers lingering on the worn cover, and set it on the counter untouched. Clara watched, her eyes searching mine, but I had no words to give her. Later, alone in my bedroom, I listened to the hospice voicemail. The nurse said Harold had asked for me, his voice faint but clear, saying, "Tell Sadie she's enough. Enough." The words settled into me, soft but heavy, a lifeline I didn't know I needed. But as I sat there, the scrapbook's shadow looming in the next room, I felt the cost of this fight the family had unraveled. The money was coming, but the price was something else, something I couldn't name, and it left me hollow, staring into the dark, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. 6 months after the courtroom, I found myself at a park near my apartment, the kind with wide fields and benches worn smooth by time. The July air was warm, carrying the scent of cut grass and blooming jasmine. I walked the gravel path, my sneakers crunching softly, Nathan beside me, his steps matching mine. We didn't talk much these days. Not about the case or my parents, but his presence was enough, a steady rhythm in the quiet I was learning to embrace. I'd started seeing a therapist, a woman named Joyce, with a voice like a low tide, calm and pulling. She'd asked me to name what I wanted, not for my parents, but for myself. The question had stuck like a seed in soft earth, and I was still digging for the answer. Today the park felt like a place to look, its open sky, a canvas for thoughts I'd kept locked away. I sat on a bench, the wood warm under my hands, and watched a group of kids chase a soccer ball, their laughter sharp and free. Nathan settled next to me, his arm resting along the bench's back. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, like he knew the question was bigger than it sounded. I nodded, my eyes on the kids. "I'm trying to be," I said, and it was the truth, raw and unpolished. Therapy had been hard, peeling back layers of hurt I hadn't named. Joyce had me write letters, not to my parents, but to the younger me, the one who'd believed love meant saying yes to everything. I'd written about the summer I turned 12, when I'd spent weeks painting their fence, proud of the blisters on my hands, because it meant I was helping. I'd told that girl she didn't have to earn their love, that she was enough, just as she was. The words had felt clumsy, but they'd loosened something in me, a knot I hadn't known was there. Nathan pointed to a hawk circling above, its wings cutting clean arcs against the clouds. "Look at that," he said, a small smile in his voice. "Doesn't even think about falling." I watched the bird, its ease a quiet lesson, and felt a stir of something new, not peace exactly, but a glimpse of it like light through a half-open door. I leaned into him, my shoulder against his, and let the moment hold me, simple and real. Back home, I found a letter from Raymond in the mail, a single page with a check for the first repayment, $500. His handwriting was shaky, the note brief. "We're trying, Sadie." "I'm sorry." I set it on the kitchen counter next to a potted basil plant I'd started growing, its leaves bright against the clay. The apology was small, a pebble in a river, but I didn't throw it away. I didn't know what to do with it yet, but I let it sit, let it be part of the mess I was sorting through. I watered the basil, the soil cool under my fingers, and thought of Joyce's question again. What did I want? I wanted mornings like this, walks with Nathan, the smell of earth in my hands. I wanted to build something that was mine, not defined by their choices or my anger. The thought was fragile, but it was there, taking root, and I held it close, letting it grow in the stillness of the afternoon. The week slipped by, and I found myself in the kitchen with Clara, the air thick with the smell of garlic and tomatoes. We were cooking something we hadn't done together since we were kids, crowding around our old stove for holiday dinners. Now the counter was scattered with onion skins and a half-empty jar of sauce, and Clara was chopping basil, her knife steady but slow, like she was savoring the task. I stirred the pot, watching bubbles rise, and felt a quiet ease a moment that didn't demand anything from me. Clara glanced up, her eyes softer than they'd been in months. "Remember when we made that awful lasagna for Grandpa?" she said, a laugh breaking through her words. I smiled, the memory sharp Harold's face as he took a bite, pretending it was gourmet, his grin wide enough to hide the taste. He ate 3 helpings. I said, my voice warm, just to make us feel good. We laughed, the sound mingling with the sizzle of the pan, and for a moment it was just us 2 sisters finding their way back. We talked about Harold, his hospice room, the way he'd still try to tell stories even when his breath was short. Clara set down her knife, her hands still. "He's proud of you," she said, her voice low. "He told me last week. Said you're the strongest person he knows." My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. I let her words settle, let them fill the spaces where doubt had lived too long. Harold's pride wasn't a fix, but it was a light guiding me through the fog. Later we ate at my small table, the pasta steaming between us. Clara talked about her new job, a part-time gig at a bookstore, her voice bright with plans. I listened, fork in hand, and saw her differently, not just as the kid sister I'd protected, but as someone carving her own path. I told her about my therapy, about Joyce's questions about the basil plant thriving on my counter. "I'm figuring out what I want," I said, the words new but true. Not what they want, or what I thought I should want. Just me. Clara nodded, her eyes steady. "You're good at that," she said. "Better than I am." I shook my head, but her words stayed a quiet mirror, reflecting a version of me I was starting to recognize. The meal ended and we cleared the plates, our movements slow, deliberate, like we were building something fragile but real. I washed the dishes, the warm water soothing my hands, and felt a shift, a settling of the pieces I'd been carrying. That night I sat on my balcony, the city lights flickering below. Nathan was inside, reading his presents, a comfort even from a distance. I held a small stone I'd picked up at the park, smooth and cool, its weight grounding me. I thought of my parents, of Raymond's letter, of Diane's silence since the courtroom. I didn't hate them, not anymore, but I didn't need them to define me either. I was learning to let go, not of the hurt, but of the need to fix it. The stone fit perfectly in my palm, a reminder of the park, of the hawk, of the life I was choosing. I set it on the railing, its outline sharp against the night, and breathed deeply, the air cool and clean. The world was still there, messy and unbroken, and I was part of it, not running, not hiding, just standing in the quiet, ready for whatever came next. A year had passed since that birthday, and I stood in a small community center, its walls lined with folding chairs and a faint smell of pine cleaner. Harold's memorial was simple, just like he'd wanted, with a few neighbors, Clara and me, gathered around a table of his old photos. I held a picture of him fishing at the lake, his hat tilted, a grin splitting his face. My voice shook as I spoke to the room, not about the car or the pain, but about his kindness, the way he'd made me feel, seen always. Clara stood beside me, her hand brushing mine, and we shared a look, a silent nod that we'd made it through. The room felt warm, not from the heater, but from the stories people told Harold, fixing a neighbor's roof, teaching kids to whittle, giving more than he had. I realized he'd given me that too, a strength that didn't shout, but held steady like a river carving stone. After I walked outside, the Oregon air crisp, the sky a soft gray. Nathan waited by the car, his coat collar up, and I leaned into him, letting his warmth ground me. We drove home in silence, the kind that didn't need filling, and I thought about the year, how it had reshaped me. I'd started journaling, not letters now, but small notes, the way sunlight hit my coffee mug, the sound of rain on my roof, moments I wanted to keep. It was new, this habit of noticing, of choosing what to hold close. At home I found a letter from Diane slipped under my door. Her handwriting was careful, the words hesitant but raw. "I failed you, Sadie," she wrote. "I was scared, and I chose wrong. Can we talk?" My fingers traced the paper, the ink smudging slightly. I didn't feel anger, not like before, but a quiet ache, like a bruise fading. I set the letter on my desk next to a candle I'd lit for Harold, its flame small but steady. I wasn't ready to answer, but I didn't tear it up. That was something. Clara came over later, bringing a loaf of bread she'd baked, still warm. We sat on my couch, tearing pieces, the crumbs scattering like confetti. She talked about visiting Harold's hospice, how he joked about her terrible coffee even at the end. He believed in us, she said, her voice soft. I nodded, my throat tight, and saw his face in my mind, not frail but laughing the way he'd been at the lake. He'd given me more than a car, more than money. He'd given me a way to see myself even when others couldn't. I stood to make tea, the kettle's hum filling the room. My apartment was small, but it was mine, filled with things I'd chosen: a woven blanket, a shelf of secondhand books, a jar of pebbles from the park. I'd bought a used car last month, a blue hatchback, nothing fancy, but it felt like freedom, like a promise I'd made to myself. Driving it, I'd roll the windows down, let the wind tangle my hair, and feel a spark of who I was becoming. As the tea steeped, I looked out my window, the streetlights glowing soft against the dusk. The world felt different now, not perfect, but possible. I was learning to live in it, to carry Harold's love and my own strength, to let the past be a story, not a chain. I breathed in the air, cool and clean, and let it out slow, feeling the weight lift just a little, like a page turning. The next morning I woke early, the apartment still cloaked in pre-dawn gray. I slipped on a sweater and stepped onto my balcony, the air sharp with the promise of fall. A single star lingered above the horizon, faint but stubborn, and I watched it, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The world was quiet, and in that stillness I felt a shift, like a door creaking open inside me. I wasn't the Sadie who'd stood in that courtroom, fists clenched, or the one who'd wept in Harold's cabin. I was someone new, pieced together from the cracks, stronger for it. I thought about Diane's letter still unanswered on my desk. Part of me wanted to call, to sit across from her and hear her voice, not as my mother, but as a woman who'd made mistakes. I wasn't ready to forgive, not fully, but I was starting to see her differently, not as the villain in my story, but as someone caught in her own fears, her own failures. That understanding didn't erase the hurt, but it softened it like rain on hard earth. Clara had started coming over more, our evenings filled with board games or old movies. Her laughter a bridge between who we'd been and who we were now. Last night she'd talked about setting boundaries with our parents, her voice steady, a mirror of my own growth. I'd listened proud and realized I was teaching her something, not by words, but by living it, that we could love our family and still choose ourselves. It was a lesson I'd learned slowly through nights of doubt and days of small victories, like buying that hatchback or planting herbs in my kitchen. I walked inside, setting my mug on the counter, and opened my journal. The pages were nearly full, a record of this year's quiet revolutions. I wrote about the star I'd seen, how it reminded me that light persists even when the sky feels heavy. I wrote about Harold, how his belief in me had become my compass, guiding me when I couldn't see the path. And I wrote about myself, not the daughter or sister or wife, but Sadie, a woman learning to trust her own heart. That afternoon, I drove to a thrift store, picking out a frame for one of Harold's photos, the one of him fishing. I hung it in my living room, its place on the wall, a quiet claim to his memory. Standing back, I felt a calm settle over me, not the absence of pain, but the presence of something else: acceptance. I'd fought for justice, for truth, but what I'd found was bigger. I'd found a way to live without needing their approval, to build a life that was mine, flawed and beautiful. The lesson wasn't loud or grand. It was this: we don't heal by erasing the past, but by carrying it differently with hands that know their own strength. I'd learned to love my parents without losing myself, to hold space for their mistakes and my own worth. It was a freedom I hadn't known I needed, one that let me breathe deeper, stand taller, see the world not as a battle, but as a place to grow. What's the hardest truth you've had to face to find your own strength? Share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. If this journey resonated with you, please give it a like, subscribe for more stories that hit close to home, and share it with someone who might need it. Thank you for being here, for listening, for carrying your own light. Here's to healing, one step at a time.